Hello and welcome. My name is John Yanofsky, and I'm the director of Kupferberg Center for the Arts at Queens College. Thank you for joining us for tonight's KCA online program presented by our title sponsor, New York Community Bank. This evening is the latest installment of our series, Off the Page, Conversations with Writers, which is produced in collaboration with the Queens College Department of English, the Provost's Office, and the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities. And tonight, we're thrilled to feature a reading and conversation with internationally recognized poet, playwright, and essayist Claudia Rankine. It's a true honor. It's also an honor to have with us this evening Queens College professor and acclaimed author in her own right, Maaza Mengiste, who will be hosting the discussion with Ms. Rankine. Now, this series is especially rewarding for KCA as we're breathing new life in what had been the evening reading series, but now under its new name, Off the Page, and new curatorial leadership from Queens College professor and author Vanessa Perez Rosario, who you'll meet shortly. Now, we hope that you've been enjoying some of KCA's other virtual offerings over these past months, our streaming concerts, artist discussions, gallery talks, and readings like tonight. Now, this season has indeed been unique, and we're so appreciative of our sponsors and our funders who've helped us navigate these times to bring you a full slate of virtual offerings. We thank them for their support, including New York Community Bank, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Max and Selma Kupferberg Family Foundation, the organization Poets and Writers. And in addition, this event is part of the Marjorie Hecht Watson Memorial Reading Series, which is supported by the family and in memory of Marjorie Hecht Watson, who received her bachelor's in 1964 from Queens College and who developed a lifelong passion for literature by attending literary readings here. So we thank all of our sponsors for making this possible, which brings us to tonight. And as mentioned, the Off the Page series is being curated by a recent addition to the Queens College faculty, professor and author Vanessa Perez Rosario. Now, Vanessa has been shepherding us through this series, and we're excited to see what else she has in store for the series moving forward. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Vanessa into the broadcast. Hey, Vanessa.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Welcome. Off the Page Conversations with Writers is a readings and conversation series that brings acclaimed authors and rising stars to campus to read from their work and engage in dynamic, moderated conversations about literature, culture, and pressing issues of our time. And I'm very excited this evening to have with us Claudia Rankine, who will be reading from her newest book, Just Us, An American Conversation. It's a poignant and powerful book structured as a series of conversations about whiteness and race in America. She will be in conversation with Maaza Mengiste. Claudia Rankine is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including Citizen, An American Lyric, and Don't Let Me Be Lonely, 2 plays, including The White Card, which premiered in February 2018 and was published with Graywolf Press in 2019, and Provenance of Beauty, a South Bronx Travelogue, as well as numerous video collaborations. She's also the author of several anthologies, including The Racial Imaginary, Writers on Race in the Life of the Mind. In 2016, she co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute. Among her numerous awards and honors, Rankine is the recipient of the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry, the Poets and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, United States Artists, and the National Endowment of the Arts. She's a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and teaches at Yale University as a Frederick Eisman Professor of Poetry. She lives in New Haven, Connecticut. She will be joined this evening by Maaza Mengiste, our very own Maaza Mengiste, who was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, a Fulbright scholar and professor in the MFA in Creative Writing and Literary Translation program at Queens College. She's the author of The Shadow King and Beneath the Lion's Gaze, named one of The Guardian's 10 best contemporary African books. Her work can be found in The New Yorker, Granta, and The New York Times, among other publications. She lives in New York City. So our rundown for the program this evening is that we'll begin with Claudia Rankine, who will show us a short video and will read from her work. That will be followed by a moderated conversation with Maaza Mengiste, and then followed by Q&A from the audience. We'll open it up to receive your questions. You can add your comments and questions to the chat throughout the program. So please join me in welcoming Maaza Mengiste and Claudia Rankine.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Claudia, I just want to say it is truly an honor to be here, being in conversation with you, to hear you talk about Just Us, and to hear you read from your work. It has been something I've been looking forward to for a very long time. I can't believe it's actually happening. So thank you for this. I would like to begin this with having you read for us, and then after that I will come back and ask you some questions and have a conversation.
Thank you, Maaza. It's a mutual honor. Mutual.
Oh my goodness. This is great.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling spring-like as the crocuses are coming up on my walk. So I hope it's the same where you are. I'm going to read from Just Us. It's a book I worked on in part because I think that not all Americans are not wanting a better America, you know. So I think some people are aggressively not wanting that, but the rest of us, we want that, but we have no practice in talking about the hard questions and the hard realities that have shaped our lives. And so I I don't feel any more prepared to have these conversations. Um, but I thought I would try and understand why and where they go wrong. And so Just Us was an attempt to kind of show the anatomy of the conversation. And I'm going to start by reading the poem that opens the book, but also introduces, in some ways, the stakes of these conversations. What does it mean to want? An age-old call for change, not to change, and yet also to feel bullied by the call to change. How is a call to change named shame, named penance, named chastisement? How does one say, what if, without reproach? The root of chastise is to make pure. The impossibility of that. Is that what repels and not the call for change? What if what I want from you is new, newly made, a new sentence in response to all my questions, a swerve in our relation and the words that carry us, the care that carries? I am here without the shrug, attempting to understand how what I want and what I want from you run parallel. Justice and the openings for Just Us. There are many conversations in Just Us. I'm going to read one that took place when I went to see a play with a friend. That chapter is called Ethical Loneliness. And I'm only reading that one because often people ask me to read that one. So I thought, I will do that. It was on the page and now it's off the page. So ethical loneliness is a phrase that comes from the philosopher Jules Stoffer, and it means the isolation one feels when one, as a violated person or as one member of a persecuted group, has been abandoned by humanity or those who have power over one's life possibilities. So, one way of thinking about it is loneliness can be a dynamic that you enter, but nothing in the world supports it. You know, it's just your personal thing. Everybody's gone away, you had parents who have passed away, whatever, and you feel lonely, but the world is not set up to support that. Ethical loneliness is a kind of loneliness that is supported by individuals who are then supported by the world or by the government or by. So if a person of color, a BIPOC person, feels abandoned by those around them, um, that abandonment is also echoed in the world in terms of policy, in terms of attitudes, in terms of racial profiling, policing, etc. So I think is Jill's Stover's idea of where ethical loneliness um, expands out. So this piece is a piece that happened just in my life. I went to see a play with a white female friend, and the play makes an ask that the white people in the audience um, leave their seats and go and stand on the stage so that Black people, for the space of a few minutes, could experience a world where they have the seats to themselves and are not the ones being watched, but are the watchers or the ones who are looking on rather than the ones who are being observed. So here I go. I go to see Fairview, a play by Jackie Sibley's Jury, with a white female friend. She's interested in thinking about whiteness. This play is interested in thinking about race. We are covered in all directions. Near the end of the play, the fourth wall is broken. A character asks the white members of the audience to get up from their seats and walk on the stage, which has been transformed into a beige living and dining room with a staircase leading to the second floor. Faces will be revealed, composure tested. Effort must be made to stay within the requests of the play. The Black actor wishes the space of the audience to hold Black people in a way the world does not. The request is presented as a conditional. What if? What if the audience, in this space of the imagination, can enact something that doesn't exist in the world? Is the stage now a segregated space as a Black actor joins the Blacks in the audience? Has center stage transformed into the front of the bus? Or is it now a whites only boardroom? In the moment, no one knows what really is being proclaimed. A white man in the seat behind me says, "This is fucked up." Nonetheless, he makes his way to the stage. The white woman I am with remains in her seat. I am getting tense. The playwright is a Black woman, and I am a Black woman, and I want her play to have what it has requested, what I assume it needs. Is my identification with the playwright because she's Black, or because she's a woman, or because she's an artist? It's impossible to dissect. My attention begins to couple with a building resentment against my white friend. I feel betrayed by her. I am not the playwright. The playwright might think the success of the play depends on some white people staying in their seats. The playwright might be waiting for a Black person to get up on the stage with the white people. None do. The playwright might want me to think her request is divisive and walk out of the theater, not a black stage, not a white stage, but a united stage. The playwright might have calculated what percentage of the audience, white members of the audience, would not comply. Are my unbearable feelings a sign that I, a black member of the audience, remain inside the play? The playwright might think, why are they listening to me? As more and more white audience members fill up the stage and people of color stay seated. Will the stage hold all the white people? Or, and this is what is troubling me, the playwright might have said exactly what she wants to happen. I am trying to listen to the actors speak the closing lines of the play, which it turns out are composed of quotes from famous black writers, but all I can think about is my white friend non-compliant presence in her seat. Why won't she do what she was asked? I can't understand why she can't do such a simple thing. Why can't she see it matters? Does it matter? In the sense that race matters, her refusal feels like an insistence on full ownership of the entire theater. Oh God, I'm beginning to feel pushed out of my own seat for the last minutes of the play, burdened by my association with her refusal, a moment of franchisement perhaps. Taxi, I want to run. Away from what? An embodied refusal I can't help but see, and one that surprises me? My own mounting emotion in the face of what I perceive as belligerence, a friendship error, despite my understanding of how whiteness functions. I thought we shared the same worldview, if not the same privileges. Be still, my beating, breaking heart. When the play finally ends, I say to my confounding friend, I didn't know you were black. She doesn't respond. Given the irritation in my voice, it's not a comment seeking a response. It's my performance of my own refusal to engage beyond the terms of the play. Her performance of resistance felt like no solidarity insofar as I, as a Black person, dropped away, as the request of the play dropped away. She must understand the play's request is made in response to a world where Black people's requests don't matter. Why doesn't she recognize the moment as an offering of Black feminism? Though my friend and I are in the habit of checking in every few days, over the next couple of weeks, we speak of everything but this day. Still, I can't stop returning to the image of her glued to her seat. She was 5 rows from the stage. Why does the memory continue to infuriate and perplex me? Why am I not able to read this moment? Why am I not able to stop reading this moment? Why am I unable to settle it down and file it away? So that is one of the essays. It continues, and then my friend writes a response as to try and explain why she felt going on the stage was inappropriate for her. I am now going to show a video because people ask me, this book was written a few years ago, and then, the world of publishing, it arrived last September after many things had happened. The protests, the killing of George Floyd. Um, and so people said, what kinds of conversations happened in that year where the book was in production that you would put in Just Us? And the one conversation, there were probably many, but one that I didn't put it, obviously, the book was published, but my husband and I, the filmmaker John Lucas, worked on a video with the confrontation, the conversation that occurred with Amy Cooper and Kristen Cooper in Central Park's Ramble. And so I thought before we begin our conversation, I would show that video.
There is an African American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
Amy Cooper calls the police on a black man birdwatching. Hers was a quotidian reminder of the normalcy of, how can I put it, having not been meant to survive. Christian Cooper, no apparent relation, asked Amy Cooper to put her dog on a leash. It was a simple ask, in accordance with the rules of Central Park's ramble. I am enthralled with Cooper's affect, her plaintive 911 call of distress,
I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening
intensified with each repetition of the phrase, I am being threatened.
And there is a man, African American.
I am being threatened.
He is recording me and threatening
By the
me
third
and my dog.
repetition, her voice quivers,
African-American man. I am in Central Park.
but she's able
He is
to
recording me
multitask and
threatening myself and my
reattach
dog.
the leash to the dog as she speaks. Like an actor heightening her fear in her performance of a line, she pushes on. I am being threatened. Cooper and I both recognize she can bet on racism, racial profiling, and possible unwarranted murder of a black person to be supported systemically by random policemen, prosecutors, judges, and the carceral system at large. Our mutual socialization into repeated patterns of discrimination allows her to do what she does and prepares me to understand what she is doing in the daylight of what I am seeing. Where we part company, where we part, where I am no longer a part, is in her expectation that I will agree that she is afraid. Do fantasies create real emotions? Is Christian Cooper's possible death an acceptable loss? History says yes. Yesterday said yes. If fantasies are relevant to the moment, are they not also relevant to the consequences of the moment? Can I categorize Amy Cooper's behavior as an American story that plays fast and loose with notions of imagined fear? To imagine herself as a rescue, to imagine herself into a rescue narrative, is to activate a covert white female power trigger that can easily call in the violence of white men. One white friend puts it this way: Amy Cooper assumed her role as a piece of high-value white property in jeopardy, tapping into what she knows to be a salient catalyst for swift and deadly intervention. Given this, is her performance more incredulous rage than fear? The rules don't apply to her. Am I to understand her as thinking, or is it feeling, the fullness of, don't you see who I am? Is that white living right below, just below, a level of civility, unspoken but believed? Rage tied to white identities assumes sense of ownership of all property. Her park, her city, her apartment building,
because I would like to know who's friends
her president, her
and
police
why
force.
you're here.
Cooper's exact words were, I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening my life. Hers is the language of good manners, weaponizing the narratives of white racism. "Excuse me," she says to Christian Cooper as she dials the police. There are so many Amy Coopers, women like Lucy Foreman Hartley, the white woman who served as justification for the Tulsa massacre, the white woman behind the Rosewood massacre, the two white women behind the imprisonment of the Scottsboro boys, Carolyn Bryant Dunnan, who finally admitted to lying, but whose admittance could not bring back to life Emmett Till, or Linda Fierstein, who prosecuted the Central Park jogger case and willfully sent 5 Black and Latinx teenagers to prison for years. For years, on false and suppressed evidence. Do I need to go on? The various modes of behavior that white women weaponize in service of Black death are there to be metabolized. It's an old script, supported by this one.
Thank you for sharing that, Claudia. Wow, that's really powerful. I have to take a moment to let it all sink in. The thing that strikes me about this just immediately is your voice over these images and the video. And the effect of that is something very similar to what I felt reading your book, Just Us, An American Conversation, that your words in the book, but also your voice now in this video, is a continual, insistent disruption of a conversation that is being had in this realm of whiteness. And in particular, by white women. That clip of Amy Cooper brought to mind for me this saying that I heard a long time ago when a white woman cried in a literary festival, when she asked a question that the Black person on stage refused to answer for its insult. And she started crying, and someone leaned to me and said, someone dies when a white woman cries. And so all of these thoughts are going through, but I would like to talk to you and begin this with the force of this video. The impact of it comes, I think, from a disruption of polite society. This sense that we are not supposed to be talking about these things. The higher up we move in society or in jobs, or the more money we make, the quieter that Black people are supposed to be about what it means to live in whiteness. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about just maybe the motivations behind this other title, An American Conversation, that you included here with the book.
Thank you, Maaza. I feel like you and I have a lot of overlap in our use of historical frameworks to sort of interrogate the silences that exist there. And with the American Conversation, you're right. It was an attempt to break the the invisible boundaries of civility. You know, we for and apparently, you know, for for a long time, we have been in collusion with our own devastation because I think we believe the mythology that if we stayed silent about certain things, uh, we were working slowly to make things better. And I think we've hit that point again where people realize no, no, that we have to speak up. I you know this I hadn't watched Prince Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah, and everybody kept telling me you have to see it, and so you have to watch that conversation. So I finally did, and it in many ways is groundbreaking. It
Mhm.
is exactly what you're talking about. It's this black woman and her white husband speaking unspeakable things about the organization of the royal family, and the way those things perpetuate is because people don't speak about them,
Mhm.
and white people depend on the fact that white people will keep it um, among themselves,
Yeah.
you know, keep the racism local or something. And to hear Harry talk about how people in his family were concerned about the shade of the baby's skin, and that the amount of anxiety that
Mhm.
caused, and the fact that he couldn't have a title because in fact he was black, you know, no other reason. Let's
That's
change the
right.
rules to make sure no black person can get inside our circle of royalty, and the benefits that come with that. And so, yes, this civility has been used against, you know, it's supposed to be to ensure that people have polite conversations, are able to talk to each other. But in fact, it has silenced people and kept in place the violence of racism um, for centuries, for centuries.
Yeah, I think that video with I watched that interview with Harry and Meghan and Oprah,
Hmm.
and you know, and what I found so interesting in watching that was the way that Oprah knew what was coming. They had to have done, you know, pre-recording interviews, but her shock, especially at that moment when Meghan or Harry revealed the comment about the skin color of the baby, her shock was a performance meant to hold us, the rest of us that were watching it and felt that. It was, I think it was groundbreaking. It's interesting to see, hear the repercussions of it now.
Hmm.
Um, and I, you know, I wondered, I want to talk about Amy Cooper and I want to talk about Fairview, but I'd like to begin with just the premise of this book, which was you talking to strangers, talking to white strangers about race in one way or another. Um, that sounds so difficult, especially thinking about the fact that I'm assuming this was during the Trump era. Even if it was Obama, there, you know, the situation was still the same in America. But how did you begin to broach these subjects, that subject, with people you didn't know?
Well, you know, you and I both are in the classroom, and one of the benefits of being in the classroom is that we have the honor of teaching students who who are not cemented in ways that prevent things from happening. And so it hadn't occurred to me to go up to strangers until in my constructions of whiteness class at Yale, my students had projects, and their projects were, we're going to go talk to a family member about how their whiteness functions for them, or we're going to talk to friends, or we're going to talk to people in the cafeteria. And I thought, oh, I could do that too. I could just go talk to some people. and it was that simple. I was like, they're doing it, I can do it. I can actually do it.
Oh my.
And and at the time, pre-COVID, I was traveling a lot, business travel, and the place that I found myself with a lot of empty hours was on planes, in airport waiting rooms, and mostly surrounded by white men, also traveling for business. And so I thought, oh, look, they're sitting around, I'm sitting around. Let's talk about race. And it was and it didn't just I would it took a while. Like at first I would think maybe he's a good one to talk to, or maybe he will, I would spend a lot of time in my head trying to figure out who, but then after a while, I just whoever happened to be sitting next to me became a possible interlocutor.
Mm. It's interesting to think of airports and airplanes. Basically, on one hand, people are trapped. If you're sitting next to you, there's nowhere that they could really move if you wanted to have a conversation. But the airport and the airplane is possibly one of the most socially divided spaces that we enter into willingly. There's first class. There's frequent flyer, those people who get the most miles and can push ahead, and people become very territorial in there. And I was struck by the one moment that you write about in your book, where you talked about these white men that just came to stand next to the group, the line, and you don't cut in front of people in those lines. There's clear demarcation there. And they did it. They were able to do that. And you mentioned there's another chapter in your book about Boys Will Be Boys. I think that was the title of it. And I couldn't help looking at those two moments and wondering, how do we begin to negotiate that with the January 6th, the insurrectionists, those men, and we'll talk about the white women in there, I think, with Amy Cooper. It's something to be addressed. But those rioters, those insurrectionists felt to I wondered if if you could talk about that line of privilege that leads from the airport to that Capitol building.
Exactly. Well, I think, white men have grown up with the narrative that this is their country, that they are Jesus Christ, that they colonized the country without that word, and that they went west, young men, and got, it was by their drive that we are here, and the rest of us are visitors. And those are the westerns that they have watched. Those are the stories they grew up with, and they believe them, despite whatever history classes they had, despite whatever sociology classes they've taken. They continue to believe those narratives, and so their behavior is driven by that. And it's driven by that in a lot of ways. I think for some of these men, we see the privilege, we see um, the shock that they should be held accountable for January 6th for their behavior that day. It's like, what do you mean? um, for other men, one of the things that also interested me about white men in this country was the fact that they commit suicide at a greater rate than any other um, group. And I has also been really interesting to me, because what does it mean to Lauren Ballon, the affect theorist, wrote Cruel Optimism. And it seems to me like they're suffering from cruel optimism. Like, what does it mean to be invested in something that also is at the root of your own devastation? So you are invested in a form of government under Trump, let's say, that is not interested in your health care, not interested so people say, oh no, people don't vote against their interests. They do vote against their interests. And we're seeing that. It's very clear now. I mean, many of us thought we would never get vaccinated under Trump. And Biden has managed to organize these things in 2.5 months. So, obviously there's a difference. I'm interested in what created the white privilege as much as I am interested in looking at the effects of it on BIPOC people. Because at the end of the day, everybody's people. And everyone is managing all kinds of emotions. The emotions are different. The investments are different. The privileges are different, but we're still people managing the too muchness of certain things. And for some white people, the too muchness is the idea that they will have to share resources that they believe only they should have.
Yeah, and you mentioned Fairview in earlier, and I found that play incredibly powerful. What Jackie did was a provocation, and also, I think if you were Black in that audience, a handout to all of us. But in thinking about your work with the Racial Imaginary Institute, and also your play, The White Card, and your work with visual arts, I'm wondering, do you think Fairview heralds a change in how artists or art, or how we speak of race? Did that play feel like a marker for us?
I thought so. I think Jackie's work is amazing. She also did a play called Mary C. Cole, which also is a meta narrative around how to think about the relationship of Black women nurses to white people. And I know we're heading to the conversation, the question and answer portion of this, but I do want to say that I think that culture right now is doing an amazing job to move forward the conversations that we need to be having as Americans, and also in Britain too. I think Fairview is something in its meta look at dynamics and embody dynamics, which is the specialty of the theater. It allowed people to understand certain things, and it's amazing how many people have kept that play close since. It's amazing. I shouldn't say it's amazing. It's a tribute to Jackie's brilliance. But yes, I guess my answer is yes.
I would like to come back. I know that we are running out of time for our conversation, but I wanted to come back to the book, and here I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the structure of this. We have writing students who are listening, and the structure itself is a disruption of a conversation that's happening on one side. It felt to me, and I'd love to hear you talk about the decisions you made in this.
Well, This book, I spend a lot of time between books, and partly it's because I'm thinking about what is the structure of the book, like how to get the book to not be a story, but a process, so that the reading is more about the process of engagement than it is about the taking of information. And so with this book, I hired a psychiatrist, a fact checker. I didn't hire a lawyer, but I did have a lawyer look at everything in the book. Um, uh, um, because I wanted to kind of pull apart the anatomy of the conversation. And once I had done that, once I discussed it with the psychiatrist that I hired for the project, each conversation, and once it went to the fact checker, and he and I looked at um, the related facts for each essay. Um, and then spoke to the lawyer about the references. I then took the essay and I sent it back to the person I had the conversation with. And I said, is this a conversation we had? And would you like to respond? And if you do respond, I will put your response in the book exactly as you give it to me. I will not edit it, I will not change it. And so that became the kind of trajectory for each of them, with the exception of maybe Jefferson, who um, unfortunately is gone.
Unfortunately.
Or fortunately.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And now I think it's time to bring Vanessa in to help direct our Q&A. And there she is. There she is. And thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This was really, I really enjoyed hearing you both talk about the book and talk about important questions of race right now. I mean, the book was published at the perfect time. I mean, I suppose you couldn't have known everything that was going to happen, or maybe you could imagine some of it. But yeah, I mean, it just came out at a time when we really needed to be having this conversation, and the book allows us to have these difficult conversations. We have lots of comments in the chat. I, of course, would love to add a question before we get to the chat, maybe, if you'll allow me the moderator's prerogative to ask the first question. You mentioned history and historical frameworks, and you've mentioned Jefferson a little bit here at the end, but I was really interested in the way you played with that text, with notes on the state of Virginia. I think it's forever now in my head as Notes on the State of Whiteness. Like, I continue to confuse the title when I've talked to my students about it this semester, because we did read excerpts from Notes on the State of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson earlier in the semester, and then we read your book. And we've been thinking about history, and how we read the past. And I wonder if you could comment on that a little bit, about how history and historical frameworks, how you work with them in the present, how you think about the past and read the past in the present.
Well, I think we're always having conversations with the past. The conversation about statues, for example, that's a conversation about the past. Like, how should we see the past? Should we have to negotiate every time we go to the grocery store, Robert E. Lee, or should we not? And 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 the notes from Virginia, what I found very amusing about that is, he says, um, Black people can produce a poet, and he's referring to Phillis Wheatley. And I just thought, oh wait, let me talk here. Let's you and I, spirit of Thomas Jefferson, let's have a little conversation about that. And the erasure method that is used in the notes was an attempt to highlight certain segments of his notes, so that the conversation could be had in a way through the highlighting of the statements. The implications of those statements carried their importance. Actually, they have carried through until now. So I'm really interested not in erasing the presence of documents, but engaging them, historical documents, um, um, and moving them around. I think there is a time for the removal of some things, like the statues, but 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 I don't think they should be destroyed. I think they should be contextualized and put in museums where we know what we're looking at, you know?
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Thank you. So we have some comments here and questions from the audience. So please go ahead and add comments, questions. Okay, so we have here, were there responses from Virginia Shank? Were there any responses to the conversations that you had that surprised you? I think the conversations that end up in the book.
In the book,
Mhm.
I have a very good friend, and I was a little surprised. She and I had the conversation about Big Little Lies, the houses in Big Little Lies, as being signifiers of certain economic places. And I was surprised when I said to her, "Do you want to write a response to this?" And she said no. Um, she later said yes. But at the time, I thought, "Oh, that's why not?" You know? And so again, because I think to think about all of these things, there's so much unsaid. I would have thought she would want to say something. And you know, there's so, as a white woman who is um you know, from a wealthy family, who does own property, who does live within the signifiers of that world, I was surprised. That surprised me when she said no. I was also surprised in with the white man who I met on the airplane, who we subsequently stayed in touch, and
Mhm.
his response was to say, "Well, some of those things I said wasn't true," and that was surprising and not, you know, in some ways.
Great. Thank you. I think, Maaza, did you have I think you found a question that you wanted to?
I think Mary Catherine had a question, if we can put that up. Yeah, there we go. She says, I attended the opening of the Racial Imaginary Institute show in 2017 and was so moved by it. I'm wondering if you have plans for upcoming future public projects.
Well, thank you, Mary Catherine, for that. We had an opening planned for last spring, actually. Was it last spring? And the COVID pandemic time is yes, so it would have been last spring, on Borders and Belonging, in response to what was going on at the border, with the, you know, because I think it's really, the taking away of children from their families was one of those, you know, hit me in the knees kind of moments where you just could not believe that we were still sitting in our houses while things like that were happening to people. So we had planned that show, but then the pandemic happened. We're now working on a series of events called The Fragility of We, the Fiction of Nations, to look at what it means to consider ourselves part of a public, and how fragile is that, and what do we bring to it, what are our expectations, and is it wrong to think in a single public? Should we be intersectional as a way to accommodate more publics. And so we'll have, starting in March of next year, we will have gallery openings, a seminar, we'll do a call for papers. So look out for that on the website.
Great.
Great, thank you. We have lots more questions here. That's a question from Sasha Roberts, who asks, how do you make the distinction between whiteness in the world around you and whiteness in your own family?
That's an interesting question. I think, as I said, people are people. So my husband is a white man, but he is a man acculturated in the world. So concepts of whiteness in the world, the privileges of those things, all of those things are things that are in our house, in terms of discussions, we live it all the time. I've told in a few readings something that happened recently, which is I took my dog for a walk and I forgot to turn off the alarm in our house. And so I just ran, took the dog out, closed the door, and the alarm went off. And I didn't hear it. And I came back and there were police all over our yard. And I said to the policeman, "Oh damn, that's on me." And to get into our house, you have to put in a code, and to turn off the alarm, you have to put in a code. So I put in the code, and I go in the house, I turn off the alarm, and all of this. And I come back out, and I'm talking to the policeman, and I feel like we're having a really nice chat. And my husband has gotten an indication on his phone that the alarm is off. So wherever he was, he jumped in the car and came home. And he comes striding up, he's 6'2", and he comes striding up. And the policeman turns to my husband, who has not introduced himself, can I say? He's just coming towards us. And he said to my husband, "She said she lives here." And those moments are the moments, that's whiteness in our house.
Mm-hmm.
That's the assumption that, oh, I have been fraternizing with a non-person. I am so sorry. She told me. She made me do it. So, we have those kinds of discussions all the time because he is the benefactor. He's benefiting from white privilege 24/7. And he knows it, I know it, we see it.
It's really interesting. Thank you, Claudia. Do we have time for another question, Vanessa?
I think we do. Do you see one that you want to?
There's one that's coming to us from Italy that we can
Wonderful.
ask.
That would be great.
That's great. It's a little bit long, but good evening from Italy. I would like to ask a question. I'm wondering what the process of writing is when speaking of the unspeakable and giving voice to silence. She says, I find it difficult sometimes to decide when it is time to let writing be and not to go back to what has been written. Is there a moment when you think that what you have written is ready to be read? Thank you very much. So it sounds like there are maybe 2 or 3 questions in there.
Well, I think, the craft of writing, the thing I always say in the classroom is that the minute you write the first sentence, you begin to make rules about what's going to happen, what is going to be said. I think it's Toni Morrison who said you can read the book in the first line of you should be able to read that first and know sort of what's at stake. And certainly in the first paragraph. And so once that happens, there's certain ways in which you're building memory within a piece, and you're accountable to the structure and foundation that you put in place. And so you can't remove certain things or the whole thing will fall apart like a house. So I think it's questions of craft often come in and are directly relevant to the success of the piece. And when you've satisfied those questions of craft, you've also satisfied the needs of the piece.
Thank you. Do we have?
I think if I'd love to add at least one more question. I see a question here that we discussed a little bit in class as well. What do you think as an audience we should do after reading a book like this, or and what can we do? What is the future of Black Lives Matter? What can we do with? Where do you see Black Lives Matter going? What can be done?
Well, this is the thing. I think my fantasy for what Just Us will do for its reader, and this is not, I'm not talking about white readers or Black readers or Latinx readers or Asian readers. I mean its readers. And by that I mean the person who can read it, the person who can inhabit it, ask questions of it, is that the self-consciousness that the book enacts around language, around feeling, around attitudes, around pedagogy, around history, will become a self-consciousness that the reader takes to their own world, to their own conversations, to in order to make themselves a little suspect about why they say the things they say, why they believe the things they believe, why they're trying to communicate what they're trying to communicate. That would be my, my ideal, because I think it has to start personally to go beyond you really have to understand that you are also implicated in anything that you're involved in. In terms of Black Lives Matter, I think Black Lives Matter is an incredible organization that started, it benefited from Arab Spring and then from Occupy Wall Street. The idea that there was no centralized leader led to a movement that could spring up everywhere and in anybody's heart and in anybody's street. And what it does for me is it says, there are commitments to equity and anti-Blackness and many things that every person should own for themselves, not in alliance with Black people, but for themselves. That they have to decide, am I in support of white supremacy? Is that what I'm in support of? Or do I want a world where the perception of equity is not the perception of loss for white people, but rather equity, just equalness, a sense of equal access, equal resources. And right now, what we see is that white people think that any gain that Black people make is a loss for white people, and that they have to then double down on the racism in order to get it back. And so we have to really get to a point where all of us understand that this country is not only for any one of us. And so I think that's the kind of general, if you really open it up, message of Black Lives Matter, because it advocates involvement in government, it advocates voting rights, it advocates for equal access to representation. So that's for all of us.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we are coming to the end of our program. I don't know, Maaza, is there something more you would like to add?
The only thing is, I think that's a perfect closing, Claudia, especially in light of what happened yesterday in Atlanta with the murder of those 6 Asian women. There were a total of 8 people, but I'd like to think about that. But that event is in communication with everything we're talking about now.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for
Thank you.
bringing that forward.
Wonderful.
And thank you both for
you.
the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you both with us tonight. We have, I think John will come in shortly and close the program. Thanks to the audience for joining us, and thank you for your questions and comments. We have one more program coming up this semester. Julia Alvarez will be joining us on April 20th, and that will close our series. So.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Claudia and Maaza, Vanessa. We always like to encourage people to continue to follow our guests for upcoming events and products, books, and tours. So I know we have Claudia's website, but we can find out more information. We'll put it up on the screen, claudiarankine.com. Also for Maaza Mengiste, fresh off the press, her new redesigned website. And you can always find out too what's happening here at Kupferberg and our other events by visiting our website at kupferbergcenter.org. Also, just to reiterate what Vanessa mentioned, our next Off the Page event will be on April 20th. We do hope we see you back here. And again, really want to thank everyone for being a part of today. Claudia, for your words, your presence, and your continued interrogation of silence. Maaza, Vanessa, we also always want to thank the chair of the English department, Glenn Berger, and the Queens College Provost Office. Well, that's it for tonight. We do hope to see you back here for other KCA online programs. And most of all, thank you for joining us. Stay well, be safe. We'll see you again. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.